know what cheese curds, motorcycles, and surf rods have in common? Turns out the best of all come from Wisconsin.
That's right. We're talking the 77-year-old, family-owned American company, St. Croix Rod, where the surf is no part-time business. Offering 41 models across 5 distinct surf series, St. Croix has been designing and handcrafting high-performance, tech-forward surf rods for decades.
Simply put, St. Croix combines the best technology and components with the lengths, powers, and actions demanded by discerning anglers up and down the Striper Coast. All this to say that St. Croix is the premier choice for anglers who demand the best rods on earth. Check out the full lineup at stcroixrods.com.
Beginning in the 1970s as a mail-order catalog, the Surfcaster has long been known as the source for hard-to-find surf fishing gear, and I've been personally shopping with them since the 1980s. They offer honest advice and the best recommendations regardless of your experience level, and will tailor their suggestions to what you actually need.
As you would expect from a business that's been serving the surfcasting community for 50 years, their prices are competitive and delivery is always quick and secure. They want you to have the best possible experience in the surf and have the knowledge and inventory to put the right gear in your hands to make that happen. So check out the Surfcaster at www.thesurfcaster.com, and if you're in the area, stop into their brand new brick and mortar store in Shelton, Connecticut.
Welcome back to the Surfcast Podcast. Thanks for tuning in once again this week. Going to throw one last quick note out there. Remind everyone to check out Jerry's new book, which is called Hooked. You'll have the show notes. You can take a look there for how you can get it. Anything you want to say about it at this point, Jerry?
No, thank you, Toby, for bringing that up again. No, it's available everywhere. So you can get it everywhere.
I figure we forgot it enough times. We got to make sure we mention it now.
Yeah, thank you,
Toby. Yeah,
absolutely.
So today's topic was actually something that came about. I bounced it off of Jerry based on a seminar presentation I did a few weeks back with the Connecticut Surfcasters. And I was talking about just fishing soft plastics in the surf. And one of the things that I had mentioned was how I approach really any given spot when I'm in the surf, on my rock, fishing in an area that I'm either experienced at fishing, or if it's something I'm really trying to learn. It can work both ways, really independent of experience level with that spot. But what I'll really do is, in breaking down the water in front of me, I will sort of methodically approach or attack a spot, giving a handful of specific casts to present whatever bait that I'm throwing at different angles. And not only that, I'll sort of retain, as I'm going along, where I am as best I can in that rotation so that I can attempt to repeat the process. So, like I said, it was something that came up in the seminar that I did, and figure it's worth getting into a little deeper here today than sort of just coating over it to that degree.
So I have a question for you right away.
Yeah.
When you are doing intentional casting, which is what I kind of phrase it as, is where you're not just blindly casting out and retrieving straight back to you, or even letting it swing in front of you, low and slow or high or whatever, because those tend to be the defaults. What people do, they'll just cast, blindly, mechanically, like a machine, over and over and over with different lures, etc. And we'll get into that a little bit more. When you are being methodical and you're dissecting where you're casting in the spot, we're going to assume that this is a spot that too. We're not talking about learning a spot. That's a whole nother conversation. Mm-hmm. Do you treat it like a grid? So are you like, all right, I'm going to cast here and make this, and then I'm going to cast there and hit that. I'm going to cast here and this, or are you more like, there's this little spot, that little spot, this zone, etc.?
Yeah, I'd say I have little zones, little areas that have produced for me in the past. And what I saw, if I'm envisioning one right now as we're discussing, there's 3, maybe 4 zones that I'm looking at, again, based on past productivity. So I will concentrate the vast majority of my effort in those areas, and within each individual zone, I don't just like put one cast on it and then try the next one and then move on. I try to present different ways, whether it's the lure that I'm throwing at different angles, meaning I'm imagining or envisioning there's a fish sitting there, and I'm trying to target that fish, and I need to come at it, let's just say, at a downward angle into its field of view. and then I want to come sort of parallel right across its field of view, and then if possible coming from below and up into it. Now if I really feel that there's something there and I want to add to it, before I cycle back through, I'll sort of try to come completely over it, so really over the top of its head. And what my idea is that, again, this is presumably a primary or productive feeding location for the fish, again, based on the fact that I've caught in that exact spot in the past. So I need to trigger that fish to exert the energy to leave the comfort of its holding spot, to attack, to try my bait, to taste it, to think that it's a meal. And that I'm thinking might be based on the angle. Maybe it gives it the best opportunity to see it, comes into its vision, whatever the case may be. Sure, you can continue to hammer the exact same cast and the same pattern, the same swing through, and present the same thing. But I sort of feel that it's more likely it's just going to spook the fish. Because I've watched other species, other things. Let's say a bluegill or a bass sitting on a bed. If I just keep doing the same thing at it, I don't have a ton of experience, but enough to kind of extrapolate it over, it more just like pisses them off and they just take off. But if you can kind of present it like it's always something new coming in, I've kind of found I have more of an opportunity to turn that cast into a strike, a hit, or an opportunity to catch the fish. So that's kind of where I add that into like why I do it, instead of just, okay, this is the best spot, I'm just going to hammer it blindly and one of those casts is going to work.
So before I get into how I feel about what I do, I have another question and I don't want to lose it. I think you mentioned this in passing when you were just talking, but when you are doing all of those different meticulous patterns where you're trying to swing into low, high, all of that stuff that you were just talking about, are you changing to different lures for each one of those things? Or are you trying to accomplish every single one of those deliveries with different lures? Like, are you taking a bottle plug? Because we've been talking a lot about bottle plugs recently. You take a bottle plug, you're trying to do all those different mechanisms by, delaying where you dig it in or digging it in sooner or whatever. And then you try to do the same thing with the soft plastic with the jig head. Or is it like, well, the jig head does this, the swimmer does that? How do you approach that?
So I come at each zone with, again, basing it on the past experiences. What I have found has produced the best at that tide stage. That's the first thing out of my bag, because, and I add that piece in because now I'm thinking of another location at higher tide stage, it works better with the jig. At lower tide stages, it'll work better with a deep diving metal lip and so on. So my first cycle through that zone is with my best chance, my most productive, I won't say best chance, my most productive past lure. So I'll do a cycle or two, a 3 to 5 approaches on it, and I'll go through it kind of roughly twice. If that didn't produce, then I will generally move to the next lure. If I really want to work that spot, if I want to work that little zone, I'll then switch to a different lure. So if I was throwing a jig, whether it was, let's say, an eel style jig, a hoagie, a Joe Bags, a gravity, something like that, I may then switch to a paddle tail, because that's going to produce a different presentation. It's going to add in the vibration, the wiggle, etc. But I'll only change to that if that has worked in the past. So if it's generally a spot where it's that eel style or a metal lip, those are the two that I work through first. I don't always, though, just work that zone the entire time. If there's a zone nearby, I'll stick with that same lure. I'll try that one, and I won't come back to the first one until I've changed through again. So there's no like hard, rule for me. It's more evolving on that set and where I stand as far as what lure I have been throwing, what stage of the tide, if I've found any life. Because that's one thing. If I've gotten a sign that something's there, I'll usually just give it one more. If if I get a fish and it bumps, I'll do my next cast. If I either don't get a bump or just get a, not a solid hookup, I'll switch out right then. I will change it pretty quick rather than constantly hammering them. Again, sort of taking back to that little freshwater, observation, something different coming through. It's not the same lure. It's not always the same thing coming in, and they weren't willing to commit. There was something that wasn't quite there. So I try to trigger it. Is it that I now need to go maybe a heavier head? Is it a hard change to the angle approach, or is it just a totally new lure? Because in the very least, I've at least established there's something there. Might not be there for long, so I'm trying to quickly maximize the results off of that spot.
So you've mentioned this in passing a couple times, but I want to reiterate it, I think, because I want to make sure it's right out there. Tide stage. So you're casting methodically, you're casting with intent, you're swinging through these places, you're digging into these places, all the things you just said. As you're standing there with the tide, do you abandon any though? Are you like, all right, early in the stage, it's these, or do you keep trying all of them? Or, do you say, well, these ones are more productive? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah. So, as let's say if the tide is dropping, if the water level is dropping, I'm dealing with less water. So I'm moving towards lighter jigs. I'm moving towards, to a degree, shallower diving plugs. So I sort of evolve it in that way, that as the depth is changing, I adjust to that. But it's not purely that, because also the current is a factor in it. Because I've got one spot that at the deepest stage, I'm actually throwing, a weightless 12-inch sluggo to start. That's the first thing I'm putting through there, because the current is just barely moving. So I'm able to still get down 12, 15 feet with that weightless sluggo by casting well up current of it and dropping it down in. So it's really, it's almost like I'm envisioning in the Hangover movie when they're at the casino and he's got all, there's that like meme of all the numbers and the letters and things zipping along, and he's thinking of 1,000 things and he's focused on the one thing. That's kind of what I'm doing. I'm processing current stage, tide stage, what the conditions are doing, how it's presenting as I go, and I'm adjusting it on the fly, but I'm still focused on that one goal, with sort of glancing around all these different factors to see which ones are going to combine to produce the best possible chance to hook up on that fish. I bet if you added it up, more striped bass were caught from the surf last year on plastic swimmers than any other plug. Probably even more than bucktails. The reason is simple. For generations, the plastic swimmer has proven to be a versatile, effective, and affordable fish catching machine.
And that's where the new Hogy OG Swimmer comes in. Unlike most of the other modern swimmers that all look and act alike, the OG Swimmer brings together a traditional design with modern enhancements to offer anglers with a unique and highly effective swimming plug unlike anything else currently on the market. With a unique wobbling action, it moves like an injured baitfish, and it's a large profile, chunky and tubular, and measuring in at 7 inches. Plus, with a downturn line tie, the OG Swimmer stays shallow, making it ideal for surf anglers.
All of this is tied together in an extra hard body that's through-wired and decked out with VMC hooks and a hand-tied bucktail teaser. And just like the Hogy needlefish, you won't find a rear hook on this lure, which is better for the fish, better for your hands, and easier on your wallet. This is all part of the Hook One platform, as well as Hogy's new core philosophy, quality for today, conservation for tomorrow. To find out more about this mission, and to pick up one of these premium OG swimmers, be sure to check out www.hogylures.com.
That's really interesting, Toby, and I feel like for my spots, I am very similar to what you're talking about. But I will say, maybe I haven't thought about it enough. I do try to put a plug through a spot within a spot within a spot, which is kind of what we're talking about, in as many different ways as possible. Swimming down into it, swimming through it, high, low, slack, almost a slack line retrieve, a drift, etc. But I will say that while I was listening to you talk, I was realizing that for me, a lot of my presentations and a lot of my spots, and this is something maybe I haven't even said in my seminar series, which are, 30, 40 hours or whatever, I'm actually using different plugs to accomplish this. So when I'm looking at a spot and I'm thinking about a couple of them, which is why I'm staring at the ceiling as I'm talking at the microphone, I'm thinking of a couple of different spots in particular. And when I am trying to reach, that rock or this drop off or where that rip line starts or that seam, I am not necessarily changing the presentation of the particular plug. So, going back to the bottle plug again that I mentioned when I was asking you questions, I may not necessarily cast further up and let the bottle plug swing or throw it down and dig it in. Instead, I might throw that bottle plug a couple of times and then say, okay, I want to hit this zone. So now I'm going to throw, a hoagie or a sluggo or a redfin and try to get something much lighter that hits that angle, that presentation into that little spot differently. And I think that for me, I'm not really worried so much about, they're going to want the darter. They're going to want the bottle plug. I'm more worried about how can I hit that zone in a way that they'll eat. And that could probably be accomplished in a whole bunch of different ways. And I think, and now this is a sidebar, but I think that that's probably why, we have anglers who say, I swear you got to have the SP minnow and you got to fish it in the spot and that's the way. But their buddy can come along with a needlefish and accomplish potentially the same thing, maybe by fishing it differently, but they're fishing into that zone and delivering into that area in an intentional way. You have to do it differently because the plugs are going to be react and swim completely different. But you can get it into the face of that fish, or maybe not the face, maybe the side, maybe high, maybe low, whatever it is, wherever they are. But I think, listening to you, I've never thought about this before. We've never talked about this before. I think for me, I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to hit those spots, coming down into them, to the side of them, all of that stuff, across, way up over the top. But I'm doing that using different plugs. And so then this really then starts to refute that idea of like, the fish are on this action, or the fish are even on this profile, right? You're starting to even refute that idea. And instead it's this presentation. So, which I think that's really interesting, and I had not really thought about it. And I think that, again, we're really trying to push this idea that you don't just cast and do the same thing. Like maybe your spot, listener, you're like, I cast out, I dig in the darter, I hold on to it, I then swim it hard, I then hold on to it again, and then I just let it swing. That's what I do. So then I do the same thing with the needle. So then I do the same thing with a soft plastic. So, well, maybe it works with the darter, but now you need to do something else. And again, you're getting away from the idea of I'm just going to cast it out and bring it back, cast it down and bring it back. So it's interesting. I had not thought of it that way.
I think it's also a factor of, when there's fish everywhere, when there's like, not necessarily saying a blitz situation, but just when there's more fish around. This is definitely more of my mindset on those harder nights when there's just not a big body of fish, where I'm, my thought is that there's a couple of fish that are kind of come through, a couple of pods that I really need to be focused. If there's just kind of fish in a spot, or it's a larger, more expansive area that's sort of a generally featureless location that the fish just come in. Now, in that kind of scenario, I might slightly lean towards blind casting, but I still do it methodically. I still try to cover throughout. But when, it's definitely in places that have more defined structure, that have, prevalent feeding locations, feeding areas, even if there can be a larger body of fish around, or a lot of fish. And I still feel, though, within that, there's sort of a ranking or hierarchy of where they're going to set up. So it also kind of factors in that, which weighs more into hard structure locations, which I fish more. When I'm fishing sandy beaches, I certainly do this to a degree, but I'm more in a search mode in those places. These are definitely, was it Jimmy, I think, that was talking about, the barnacle. How did he said, are you a barnacle or I forget what his other comparison
I can't remember.
He was on.
Yeah.
This is certainly my approach when I'm the barnacle, when I'm there locked in and I've got my spot and I'm trying to really dissect it and really maximize what is there on what's, definitely, unfortunately, going of more recent times of less fish to be had.
Yeah, I don't know though.
Each cast count.
Yeah, well, so that's really getting to what I want to say before we get too long here. We've had guests say, and you've said it numerous times, that every cast that I take, I am ready for a 50 or an 80 in your case. and you're serious, and people think that's funny, but it's not a joke at all. People laugh, but it's not. Every cast that you take that you're ready for an 80. Well, I think that is really, 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 really important. So I don't want to make it sound like I don't when I say these next things. But I think that level of focus for a lot of anglers is really hard. But instead, I think potentially what could be even more important, and I could be wrong, and maybe you want to argue with me, but every time you cast, you have a plan for your plug, I think is even more important. Every single time you cast, you're not just like, F it, whip it out there. Or I'm looking away and I just kind of cast it out there straight and I just start retrieving. Every cast you take, you're like, I want my plug to do this, 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 and this. I want to do that. I'm targeting that little zone. I'm targeting this piece of the reef. I'm targeting that rock, that edge of the jetty, that sandbar, that ripple, whatever. And so every single cast I make, and I know that this is something that, I think this is something I do well because I have ability to pay attention. My attention is good. I can really focus. When I cast, it's at that little piece. And when I change my lure, now I know what that lure does, how it's different than the one I just had on. And now what am I doing? And so I'm never, ever. So, you were just talking about sand beach. I try even really hard on those big sand beaches to not do that. I try really hard to, I'm a proponent of not just walk, cast, which is something that a lot of anglers say to do and works for them. And that's fine, but that doesn't work for me. I don't just walk, take 3 steps, cast again, take 3 steps. I always am like, this has to be good or that has to be good. Now, what ends up happening, if we're talking about sand beach in particular, is that I end up jettisoning a whole bunch. And I end up walking a lot more than you probably do, listener, because I'm like, I want this cast to have a purpose, so I have to be able to see something that I like. I have to have something that I'm really like. I believe in this. Otherwise, I'm not going to cast. I'm just going to walk. Do I miss fish? Probably, because can I see everything? No. There's probably all kinds of stuff that I'm missing underneath. But for me and my productivity, I find that I want to, every single cast I take has explicit purpose. And if I have to miss a little bit to up those percentages, that's what I'm going to friggin' do.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I mean, I think it's definitely it's like the same core idea of what I'm doing. A different way to describe that. Casting with purpose for sure, and sort of the other side of it that for me at least comes hand in hand with that is somehow, and I don't necessarily know how I do it aside from when I make the cast, I'm consciously like, I'm sort of thinking it in my head, okay, this cast was here or this or whatever I'm doing with that cast, I'm sort of trying to recall it so that I can reproduce it if that, or move on to the next step, if it did or did not produce results. Meaning if I got a hit or if I got a fish doing these 3 things with this lure, I need to get right back so that my next cast, however long later however much time passes between fighting the fish, landing it, reviving it, making sure it's good to go, making sure the lure is ready, the leader is clean. There's going to be some time there because I'm not one to just horse it in and just bam, shoot the next cast out. So I'm trying to keep track of what I was doing so that my first cast following success being hooked fish or confirmation that there's something there through a hit, I can reproduce the same thing. And I try to do that, that once or twice again before changing it a different angle. If it was, missed fish, changing the angle, changing the lure, whatever the case may be. But it's something I really am always thinking about. What is not just what I'm throwing, but what that last cast was. And it kind of like drives me nuts. I've got a couple of friends that do that really well, a couple of guys that I fish with, a couple that don't. And I at least know it so that if I'm on a bite with, let's say the guys who aren't as good at recalling where they're at, I kind of expect that. I might ask them, what did you do to produce on that cast? And the ones that don't, don't keep track of, I'm usually expecting, I'm not really sure. I think I kind of cast in that area. I'm like, I kind of like a little huff, think I wish this time they had kept up, and then I'll try to figure it out myself. And, if they ask the same, I try to give them, I cast for that, I was aiming for the 3rd swirl and I came at it from an up, I'm swinging up or I was swinging down or whatever the case may be. Again, trying to reproduce, and it sort of goes back to what I said a minute ago. especially in a time when there's fewer fish around. And to your point, wanting to maximize and cast with purpose, more so that each cast isn't essentially starting fresh. You're working off of your last cast.
That's right.
Whatever it did, you're evolving each cast, each consecutive cast with purpose, why you're doing it based off of what has or has not happened previously at that cast or that out.
That's right. And I think I'll end the episode by very, very simply summing up what we've been talking about. And that's that you need to pay attention. You need to be paying attention all the time. It's the hardest thing I think about surfcasting. I do. I think it's the hardest thing. It's the simplest thing, but it's the hardest thing. You know, getting in shape, walking a million miles, knowing all your plugs, finding the spots, trespassing. Yeah, that's all hard. But the hardest thing is the simplest thing. And that's that you have to constantly be in the game, constantly focused, constantly paying attention to what you're doing. And when fishing is tough, it can be tough. And when you get into those longer times of the season, you know, summertime, let's say, it can be hard to pay attention, but you have to constantly do it. And stop spending money on plugs and stop doing this and that if you can't do those things. And you can train yourself and you can really work on your attention. And I think that when it comes to casting intentionally, it's worth your time to invest in your skill. This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com, or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, at the Surfcast Podcast.